Hello, my name's Bob Willis and welcome to Defect of the Month. Every month I try and focus on one process defect or one part of the process which causes defects and hopefully highlight to you some of the issues and hopefully how to overcome them. This month I wanted to talk about pallets and fixtures. So pallets used for soldering, wave soldering, selective soldering of printed circuit boards. One of the first things to do is, if you're going to use pallets, obviously decide on a supplier. You want to select a material which is robust and won't really cause too many issues in terms of warpage and sag during the soldering process, because you want the boards to be properly supported. I also believe it should be the responsibility of one engineer for a pallet design. So consequently, they gain experience with looking at all the different designs coming through your production facility or all the different pallets, rather than having one particular engineer responsible for a project who then responsible for a pallet design. The reason being that mistakes can occur, and also one engineer doesn't get the experience. We use pallets for wave and selective, but we also can use them for reflow soldering, for screen printing. So I'll show you a couple of examples of each during this presentation, but also what I want to do is obviously focus on the defects. Now, when you've decided on a pallet and you've got a supplier, then it's worthwhile investing in one, maybe two pallets to actually do some process trials. So you're refining the design of the pallet to give you the best process, and it also highlights some of the process issues that might occur. I would also suggest that you also number the pallets, possibly not in the early stages, but if you, let's say, invest in 10 or 20 pallets for a particular customer, then number them and also regularly clean them and regularly check them to make sure they're still working effectively. I've spent many hours trying to isolate defects which were associated with the soldering pallets, but they were defective pallets, and we were able to highlight that. Now, what sort of problems can occur? Well, first of all, solder skips. Solder skips are where the solder does not make contact with the termination, so that's quite a lot to do with design. But if the board or the pallet flexes during the soldering process, it may not come into proper contact. And if there isn't enough contact area with the solder, the heat penetration into the printed circuit board will not be effective, so through-hole fill will not work excessively either. We've got to try and eliminate excess flux traps in the pallet. So if we're wave soldering, even with spray fluxing, if we've got an excessive amount of flux, it can outgas during the soldering operation and actually push the solder away from the termination. This is one of the ways in which skips can occur. If we have too much flux and flux penetrates underneath the edges of the board, or if it's a board which you're doing double-sided reflow, then selectively soldering the through hole, you don't want excessive flux, because if that gets trapped between the board and the pallet, and that doesn't have enough time to deactivate in terms of temperature with a low clean product, then that might lead to corrosion or cleaning issues at a later stage. So again, these are sort of issues that you need to bear in mind. Now, the reason I mentioned about regular checks and regular maintenance is solder slithers, solder balls do get trapped around the edges of a pallet, and they can lift the board, so consequently they may lift it by a couple of millimeters, but that's enough to actually cause soldering defects. Now, here's just a couple of examples of some of the worst evidence of poor consideration in terms of wave soldering and not using pallets. This is one of the worst examples I ever experienced in all my years of running training courses. And you can see clearly here, that board is not flat. What we want the board to be is flat, supported by a pallet, possibly by some other techniques as well. But the key thing is good design, good engineering. one other point I'd like to raise is that if you're interested in more information on soldering pallets, Peter Swanson and myself wrote an article, a 4 or 5 page article on the subject a few years back. It's available. If you'd like a copy, just ask. And that summarizes most of the issues associated with pallets and the use of pallets in a wave and selective soldering process. Thank you for listening to Defect of the Month. My name's Bob Willis, and I look forward to presenting another Defect of the Month next month.